The afternoon light slanted through the wide glass windows of Forrester Creations, painting long golden bars across the polished floor. Paris Buckingham stood in the hallway just outside the obstetrics office, her hand still clutching the folder she had come to drop off for the company's upcoming charity gala. She had only meant to stay a moment, to deliver a few signatures, but the voices drifting through the half-closed door caught her off guard. She wasn't one to eavesdrop, not really, yet there was something in the tone of those voices, low, urgent, weighted, that froze her where she stood. She told herself she'd move after a second or two, but then she heard Taylor's name and Ridge's. And then one word that made her pulse skip: donation. At first she thought she'd misheard. The older doctor inside, speaking with an assistant, sounded perplexed, flipping through digital files. "There's an outdated clause," he murmured, "from a pre-2005 study, something about a genetic release from Dr. Hayes and a matching donor profile. Forrester, anonymous at the time. It was never closed out properly when the bank shut down." The assistant replied, "Do we notify them?" The doctor sighed. "Not yet. But if that's the batch they used for the fertilization, it means this pregnancy is technically tied to the original donor record, not to the recent sample. It's complicated, legally sound, ethically questionable." Paris didn't breathe for nearly a minute. She pressed her back to the wall, her heartbeat racing so fast she thought it might echo in the corridor. Taylor's pregnancy had already ignited gossip throughout Los Angeles, the latest, perhaps the most shocking twist in the decades-long saga between her and Ridge Forrester. But this was something no one had imagined. A hidden clause. A frozen egg. A donor whose identity, once anonymous, was now painfully clear. Ridge had given his sample years ago during a research initiative, long before any of them had been entangled again. And now, through some bureaucratic accident or medical oversight, that forgotten donation might have been the source of Taylor's pregnancy, not their recent reconciliation. Paris slipped away before anyone saw her, the sound of her heels muffled against the carpet. By the time she reached the parking lot, her mind was spinning. She wasn't even sure if she should tell anyone. The implications were enormous. But she knew Brooke Logan would want to know. Brooke always wanted the truth, even when it was the kind that tore lives apart. That evening, Paris arrived at the Logan estate, her face pale under the warm glow of the foyer light. Brooke opened the door, surprised to see her, and within moments the whole secret spilled out. Brooke listened in stunned silence, her fingers tightening around the edge of the kitchen counter. "A clause from years ago," she repeated, as if saying it aloud would make it less absurd. "And you're saying the sample wasn't Ridge's recent one?" Paris nodded miserably. "It might still be his technically, but it's from an old donation, something he probably doesn't even remember signing off on." Brooke sank into a chair, her mind a storm of disbelief and fury. This wasn't just about biology anymore, it was about manipulation, about consent. Ridge had unknowingly fathered a child from a clinical file buried under years of dust and policy. Taylor had claimed the pregnancy was the product of a rekindled romance, a new beginning, but if this was true, that story crumbled into something altogether different, a legal technicality masquerading as destiny. Brooke's instincts kicked in immediately. "We have to see the records," she said, her voice low but steady. "Every form, every transfer, every signature." Paris hesitated. That might not be easy. The clinic was closed years ago. The files could be archived, sealed, maybe even destroyed. Brooke looked up sharply. "Then we'll unseal them. I don't care if I have to take this all the way to court." The next morning, Brooke arrived at the hospital alone, dressed in the armor of professionalism, dark blazer, calm smile, the kind that didn't quite reach her eyes. She met with the head of the genetics department and requested access to the donor records connected to Ridge Forrester's old research participation. The doctor's discomfort was immediate. "Those materials are confidential," he began, but Brooke's tone left no room for resistance. "Not when they're being used without proper consent," she said. "I'm not here to destroy reputations. I'm here to protect my family." Meanwhile, Taylor sat in her office across town, blissfully unaware that her past was about to be unearthed. She had always prided herself on doing things for the right reasons, for healing, for love, for closure. When she discovered her pregnancy, it had felt like a miracle, a sign that the universe was giving her and Ridge one final chance to build the life they had always missed. She hadn't questioned the science behind it. The procedure had been handled by trusted professionals. But in retrospect, small inconsistencies began to haunt her. The nurse's strange hesitation, the missing paperwork, the doctor's comment about reviving an archived file. When Ridge arrived to take her to lunch that day, she smiled through her unease. "You've been quiet lately," he said as they walked through the garden. She hesitated before answering. "Just tired," she lied. He took her hand. "I still can't believe we're doing this again. A child, after everything." His voice was tender, full of hope, and for a moment, Taylor wanted to believe that nothing could destroy this fragile piece. But then her phone buzzed, an email notification from the hospital, subject line, "Patient record verification request." Her heart stilled. At that same moment, Brooke was standing in the hospital records room, her eyes scanning the faded digital archive on the screen. There it was, the donor file, sealed under Ridge's research code name, dated over 15 years ago. The note attached read, "Approved for limited clinical use. Genetic rights retained by donor under Clause 47B until expiration of specimen bank license." The license, apparently, had expired just months before the fertilization was performed. Brooke exhaled sharply, her fury rising. "So it wasn't an accident," she murmured. "It was negligence or worse." She printed the file and tucked it into her bag, her mind already spinning through the implications. By the time Brooke arrived at Forrester Creations that afternoon, the storm had begun to form. Ridge was in the design office with Steffi when she entered, her presence like a lightning strike. "We need to talk," she said. Ridge frowned, sensing the tension in her voice. "What's going on?" Brooke placed the printed documents on the table. "Your donation. The one you made years ago for medical research, it was used. That's where Taylor's pregnancy came from." For a moment, neither Ridge nor Steffi spoke. Ridge's expression shifted from confusion to shock. "What are you talking about?" he asked. Brooke's voice trembled with restrained anger. "The fertilization wasn't from your recent reunion. It came from frozen samples. You didn't father that child in love, Ridge. You fathered it through paperwork you signed 20 years ago." Steffi's face went pale. "Mom didn't know," she said quickly, almost pleading. Brooke turned to her. "Then who did?" "Someone had to authorize it. Someone at that hospital decided to use a specimen from a closed bank, and somehow Taylor was the recipient." Ridge's hands went to his temples. "This can't be right," he muttered. "That was supposed to be anonymous. I barely remember filling out those forms." Brooke's eyes softened for a brief second. "It is right. I checked the logs. It's your genetic profile, Ridge. The baby is technically yours, but not in the way you think." The fallout was immediate. News spread within hours through whispers and half-truths. Forrester Creations became a battlefield of quiet conversations and lingering stares. Taylor, when confronted, was devastated. "I didn't know," she cried, her voice shaking as Ridge confronted her in her office. "I didn't know they used an old sample. I thought it was the procedure we did together." Ridge's expression was a mixture of hurt and disbelief. "You should have known. How could you not ask questions? Didn't you wonder why it happened so easily, after everything?" Tears streamed down Taylor's face. "I trusted them. I wanted to believe that this miracle was real. I didn't want to think it was just science gone wrong." Brooke, standing in the doorway, watched the two of them unravel. She should have felt vindicated, but all she felt was exhaustion. "This isn't just about the two of you," she said quietly. "This is about ethics, about consent, about a system that allowed this to happen." The words hit harder than she expected. Within days, the story leaked, first to the local press, then to national networks. The Forrester fertility scandal, the headlines read. Questions of legality and morality swirled. Did the clinic have the right to use old specimens? Could a donor be a father without knowing? Did Taylor have any legal responsibility for a child conceived under outdated consent? The Forrester family fractured under the weight of the attention. Steffi defended her mother fiercely, calling Brooke's actions a crusade for revenge disguised as justice. Brooke countered by holding a press conference, demanding transparency from the hospital. "This isn't about revenge," she said into the cameras, her voice trembling but firm. "It's about accountability. My husband's genetic material was used without his knowledge, and a woman's trust in her doctors was violated. This isn't love. It's exploitation." Behind the scenes, Ridge's turmoil deepened. He couldn't look at Taylor without seeing betrayal, yet he couldn't look at Brooke without seeing the destruction her truth had unleashed. "You think I wanted this?" he said one night, his voice breaking. "You think I wanted to be the father of a child I didn't choose to conceive?" Brooke's eyes filled with tears. "You are the father, Ridge, whether you like it or not. But this isn't about biology anymore. It's about what kind of man you are when the world finds out." In the weeks that followed, the investigation intensified. Lawyers descended, hospital executives resigned, and a review board opened an inquiry into the now-defunct fertility bank. What emerged was worse than anyone had expected. The facility had reused donor material from long-expired agreements to fund private research partnerships. Ridge's old file, labeled inactive, had been accidentally or deliberately reactivated during a system transfer. Taylor's physician had authorized the embryo implantation under the assumption that the material was current and properly consented. The revelation split the community. Some called it destiny, that two people connected for decades had created life in such an extraordinary, almost fated way. Others called it monstrous, a violation of autonomy and ethics. Brooke, for all her righteous fury, found herself caught between those two interpretations. In private, she admitted to Hope that part of her couldn't stop wondering whether the universe had played a cruel joke, or whether it had simply forced Ridge to face the consequences of every choice he'd ever made. As for Taylor, she retreated into silence. The pregnancy continued, but the joy that had once filled her eyes was gone. She stopped attending family gatherings, avoided the press, and refused to speak about the scandal. At night, she would sit alone by her window, hand on her stomach, whispering to the child growing within her. "You were wanted," she said softly. "Even if everything else is chaos, you were wanted." Ridge visited her occasionally, his presence quiet, uncertain. He never spoke of the lawsuit or the headlines. He only asked how she was feeling, whether she was eating enough, whether the baby was healthy. There was still tenderness between them, but it was buried under layers of guilt and doubt. Every time he looked at her, he saw both the woman he had loved and the ethical nightmare that bound them together. When the baby was finally born, a boy with Ridge's eyes and Taylor's quiet smile, the world watched. Brooke stayed away from the hospital that day, choosing instead to walk along the beach, the waves crashing hard against the shore as the sky turned gold. She thought of all the years she had spent fighting for Ridge, the countless times she had lost and won him back. But this time, the victory didn't matter. There were no sides to take anymore, only consequences to endure. A week later, Ridge came to see her. He looked older somehow, his face etched with exhaustion and sorrow. "He's beautiful," he said simply. Brooke nodded, unable to trust her voice. "What will you name him?" she asked. Ridge's eyes softened.
"Truth," he said.
"Because that's all that's left." Brooke looked away, tears catching the light. "Then I hope he grows up in a world where truth doesn't destroy people the way it destroyed us." In the months that followed, life settled uneasily into a new rhythm. The investigation closed, the hospital issued formal apologies, and Taylor's name was cleared of wrongdoing. Yet the questions lingered, the kind that time could never fully answer. Was the child Ridge's by fate or by accident? Did love justify the chaos, or did it simply survive in spite of it? Brooke never stopped wondering, and sometimes, when she saw Ridge with the boy, she felt a strange, unspoken calm. Perhaps destiny wasn't clean or kind. Perhaps it was something messy, something born from both love and error. But as she watched them together, she realized something else. that even amid betrayal, even amid scandal, life had found a way to endure. And in that fragile endurance, there was something like peace. The day the bleeding started, Taylor knew something was wrong. It was subtle at first, a heaviness in her abdomen, a sharp, pulling ache that came in waves, then the sudden warmth of blood seeping through fabric. The clinic lights blurred as doctors rushed in, their calm words slicing through her panic. Placenta previa, a complication she knew all too well from her years as a psychiatrist working with mothers who'd lost children. But hearing it applied to her own body felt unreal. The placenta had attached too low, dangerously close to her cervix. Any invasive procedure, anything that disturbed that fragile balance, could trigger catastrophic hemorrhage. When the diagnosis came, so did the warning. No amniocentesis, Dr.
Hayes.
No invasive testing of any kind. It's too risky for both you and the baby. Those words closed a door she'd been desperate to open. For months, questions about the baby's paternity had followed her like shadows. Ridge had been the assumed father, the emotional anchor she clung to when doubt threatened to drown her. But with every whispered suspicion, every sidelong glance from Brooke, the ground beneath her had begun to crumble. Now, science itself was denying her closure. The one test that could have ended the speculation, the needle that could have extracted truth from the very blood she carried, was off limits. All she could do was wait, suspended between faith and fear. Brooke, meanwhile, faced her own torment. She had fought her entire life for Ridge, for his loyalty, his love, his family, and every time she thought she'd won, the universe found new ways to remind her of how fragile that victory was. Taylor's pregnancy had been a cruel twist in a decades-old story that refused to end, and though Brooke had once demanded answers with righteous fury, she now found herself hesitating. The doctor's warning echoed in her mind. The baby could die. The woman she had spent years resenting could die. For once, vengeance tasted bitter instead of sweet. Hope noticed the change first. Her mother, usually fierce and unapologetically bold, had gone quiet. "You're not yourself," Hope said gently one evening, finding Brooke sitting alone in the darkened Forrester living room. Brooke's eyes were fixed on an ultrasound photo left behind on the coffee table, a tiny, blurry miracle that had somehow become the axis of everyone's pain. "I can't be the reason something happens to that child," Brooke whispered. "Even if it means I'll never know the truth." The next day, she called Ridge. Her voice was calm, almost resigned, as she told him she was backing away from any further testing for now. "The baby's safety comes first," she said simply. "I won't push Taylor into something that could hurt her or the child. Whatever happens, we'll deal with it when the time comes." Ridge didn't speak at first. The silence on the other end stretched long enough to feel like disbelief. Then he said quietly, "You mean that?" Brooke hesitated, then nodded even though he couldn't see it. "I do." The news spread quickly, shocking everyone who knew Brooke's history. Even Steffi, who had grown up watching her mother and Brooke fight over Ridge like two forces of nature, was taken aback. "She's backing off?" she asked her father, skepticism sharpening her voice. Ridge nodded, but his expression was unreadable. "She said it's about compassion." Something in that word, compassion, stirred something inside him. He had expected Brooke's fury, not her grace. And maybe that was what broke him most of all. That night, he couldn't sleep. He lay awake, staring at the ceiling, thinking about the woman who had once torn his world apart and the one who had helped him rebuild it. He loved them both in different ways, but the uncertainty surrounding Taylor's pregnancy had split him in two. Now, Brooke's unexpected kindness made him question everything again. The next morning, Ridge made a call of his own to a specialist in Switzerland. If invasive testing was too dangerous, there were alternatives. New, non-invasive prenatal tests using advanced genetic sequencing could analyze fetal DNA through a simple blood sample from the mother. It would take time, and the logistics would be complicated, but it was possible and safe. When he told Taylor, her eyes filled with tears. "I thought you didn't want to know," she said softly. "I don't," he admitted. "But I need to. For you. For me. For us." Arrangements were made discreetly. The blood samples were shipped under coded aliases to a private European laboratory known for its precision and discretion. Weeks passed in agonizing silence. Taylor's health remained fragile. Every day was a battle against stress, against movement, against the fear that one wrong step could end everything. Brooke stayed away, true to her word, though her restraint became its own kind of torment. Hope urged her to rest, to move on, but Brooke couldn't stop herself from scanning her phone for any update, any whisper of news. Then one afternoon, Ridge arrived at her door, his face ashen. Brooke knew before he even spoke that the results had come in. He handed her a sealed envelope, his hands shaking slightly. "I thought you'd want to see this too," he said. She hesitated before opening it, her heart pounding. Inside was a single page with sterile black text. Paternal probability, 0.5%. Conclusion, excluded as biological father. Brooke read the line twice, then a third time, until the words blurred into meaninglessness. "Not Ridge," she murmured. "Not Ridge." Ridge sat down heavily, his expression vacant. 99.5%, he said hollowly. "There's still 0.5%. Maybe it's wrong." Brooke shook her head. "You know it isn't." Across town, Taylor received the same news from her doctor. She didn't cry at first. She simply stared at the printout in silence. The room seemed to close in around her, the walls shrinking until she could barely breathe. For months, she had told herself that love could silence doubt, that fate wouldn't be so cruel as to give her a child without a father's certainty. But now, all of it collapsed. Ridge wasn't the father. The foundation she'd built her fragile happiness on was gone. The aftermath was chaos. Ridge, torn between anger and pity, couldn't stay still. He wanted to comfort her, but every word felt wrong, every gesture hollow. Brooke, despite herself, felt no triumph, only sorrow. The truth she'd once demanded had come too late and cost too much. But the question remained. If not Ridge, then who? The medical records were re-examined, the timeline scrutinized. The European lab confirmed that the genetic markers matched none of Ridge's recorded donations. Someone else's DNA was in the system, someone with a similar profile, close enough to mimic Ridge's until modern testing unraveled the illusion. It was as if the past itself had reached out to twist the knife further. Speculation ran wild. Brooke, still reeling, wondered if this was the final echo of the old fertility scandal, the one involving Ridge's anonymous donation years ago. Could the same bank have mixed samples again? Could another donor, long forgotten, be the true father? Ridge, guilt-ridden, demanded answers. He pressed the doctors, the lab, anyone who might know. "Whose DNA did you use?" he demanded. "If it wasn't mine, then who did this?" But the records were incomplete. The European facility confirmed a data mismatch between the U.S. and archived European donor lists. Somewhere along the line, the names had been lost, replaced by codes. It could take months to trace, the geneticist explained. Taylor's condition worsened under the weight of it all. Stress sent her blood pressure soaring, forcing the doctors to hospitalize her for observation. The once glowing mother-to-be was now pale, fragile, her hands trembling as she clutched her abdomen. "It's my fault," she whispered one night when Ridge came to visit. "If I hadn't pushed for this, if I hadn't wanted to believe so badly, none of this would have happened." Ridge took her hand, his voice quiet but heavy. "You wanted to believe in love. That's not a crime." But even as he said it, guilt gnawed at him. He had been the one to suggest the test, to chase the truth Brooke had been brave enough to leave buried. Now that truth had broken them all. Outside the hospital, reporters began to swarm, feeding on rumors. The Forrester family scrambled to protect their privacy, but the scandal was too tantalizing to suppress. "Who is the father?" the headline screamed. Steffi, fiercely protective of her mother, lashed out at Brooke. "You couldn't leave it alone," she accused. "You couldn't stand not being right." Brooke met her glare with weary eyes. "I didn't do this, Steffi."
Ridge did.
Because even he couldn't live with the lie. Days turned into weeks, and still no answers came. Then, one evening, Hope arrived at Brooke's door carrying an envelope. "You need to see this," she said quietly. Inside were the preliminary results from an independent genealogical database, a private match traced through secondary DNA. Brooke's breath caught as she read the name, Jack Finnegan. It didn't make sense at first. Jack, the man once entangled with Sheila, the quiet attorney who had always orbited the Forrester world at a distance. His DNA had appeared as a partial paternal match, enough to suggest relation, but not direct fatherhood, which could only mean one thing: the child's father was a close relative of Jack's. Brooke sat down heavily, the realization dawning like slow lightning. "Oh my God," she whispered. Could it be Finn? The thought was unbearable, yet undeniable. Finn, the doctor, Taylor's friend, a man who had helped her through her grief. Had there been a mistake? A procedural confusion? Or something far darker? Ridge confronted him days later, his voice trembling with disbelief. Finn, blindsided, insisted he'd had no involvement beyond providing medical consultation. Ridge, I wouldn't, he said, his voice breaking. But the lab errors, the overlapping profiles, the old fertility contracts, it all painted a picture too tangled to ignore. In the end, no one could prove intent. The hospital's investigation revealed a history of mixed samples from the same donor program that had once handled Ridge's old genetic material. Some batches, improperly cataloged, contained genetic contributions from multiple donors, including, potentially, members of the Finnegan family. For Taylor, the truth, or what passed for it, was unbearable. Her pregnancy had begun as a symbol of renewal, of a love reborn after decades of pain. Now it had become something else entirely, a child conceived through a web of errors, lies, and fate's cruel indifference. When she finally gave birth, weeks earlier than expected due to her condition, she held the baby in her arms and wept, not from joy, but from a grief she couldn't name. Ridge stood beside her, his expression hollow. The baby's eyes, gray-blue, not his, not hers, seemed to mirror the confusion of everyone who had fought so hard for truth. Brooke, watching from afar, felt no triumph, only a quiet ache. They had all chased answers, but none of them were prepared for what those answers cost. In the months that followed, as Taylor recovered and Ridge drifted further into silence, one question continued to echo through the halls of the Forrester home. Does it matter who the father is, if the child was born of love? For Brooke, that question haunted her. For Taylor, it broke her. And for Ridge, it was the only truth left standing. Because sometimes, he realized too late, the pursuit of certainty doesn't bring peace. It only exposes the fragility of everything we thought we knew.